the video once this is over, probably at some point next week. But thanks for joining us for this is now the 28th meetup of our community, the New York Supply Chain meetup. I was looking at the number of members we have just before we started, and I think it's 2,620 something plus. The New York Supply Chain meetup is the flagship of our broader network of communities, the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. And we really started the community for a very simple reason. The first was I wanted to hang out with people who spend all their time thinking about supply chain and innovation and technology, because fundamentally, I believe that the most interesting, most exciting, most profitable, and most impactful investment at the early stage, the interesting opportunities in early stage venture capital from now looking into the future are all in supply chain in one way, shape, or form. And then the other reason was to make it possible for technologists building new innovations for supply chain and business executives who work in the supply chain and live with the problems that technologists are trying to solve day in and day out to come together at least once a month in a very informal setting to have conversations that are low stakes in nature, but that over time build trust and understanding between the builders, that's the technologists, and the buyers, that's the business executives. And the idea for this topic was actually suggested by Charlie. He saw a tweet from Peter Tershwell, who runs the Journal of Commerce, and I think Peter, in a very tongue-in-cheek way, said, "Whatever is happening with blockchain in freight." And so Charlie prodded me and said, maybe this is a topic for our next meetup. And so that's how this came together. Our conversations are really informal. The goal is on hearing what exciting work people are doing, asking questions, figuring out what we can do to be helpful if that is something that would benefit them. But we do away with the formalities. The goal is on learning, on understanding what's happening, on the changes, the positive changes that the work people are doing will create, and then we take it from there. In terms of how we run things, I like to say, for example, this morning, this is going to be the Lewis King show. And so once I'm done running my mouth, I'll turn things over to Lewis, and he'll manage proceedings from here. But I'm really excited to hear about the work that DLT Labs is doing. So I'm looking forward to the presentation from Sergey. And then once that's done, we have the moderator discussion with Lewis, Sergey, and Patrick, who will tell us about what Beta has been up to. Some of you might remember, if you were there in June 2019, when we had our global summit, that Patrick was one of the presenters, and I think his presentation was one of the most insightful that I've seen when it comes to blockchain and freight. So on that note, I will keep quiet and turn things over to Lewis.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And the next thing that we have is Sergey is going to give a presentation now.
Awesome, thank you. Let me share my screen. By the way, Brian and Lewis, thank you for the format, because again, from what all the other shows that I've been part of so far went this way. There is a big presentation with maybe 5 minutes for Q&A in the end. And usually the magic happens during the Q&A, because this is when the conversation takes place. Here you flipped it completely on its head, right? So there is a quick presentation to set the context, and then there is a bit longer discussion where we actually can have this conversation, where we can dive into those juicy topics, right? And really have this information exchange. So thank you so much for this format. I think it's amazing, just in terms of feedback. So yeah, do you see the lasting marriage or just a flying slide?
Yes. Yes,
Perfect.
we see the
Yeah.
slides.
And let me know if there is any kind of connection problem. So, because again, we're all working from home, so it's not as reliable as it could be. All right, so let's talk about blockchain and supply chain. A couple of words about me. So I'm Chief Strategy Officer with DLT Labs, have been in technology industry for now close to 30 years, hard to believe, and spent some time in financial services, public sector, consumer retail, and right before joining DLT Labs, I was CIO for Walmart Canada, basically running technology for both bricks and mortar and online businesses. DLT Labs, we are a global leader in the enterprise supply chain, in the enterprise blockchain deployment. We have offices in Canada, we're based in Canada. We also have offices in India, Japan, and representation globally as well. So let's talk first about the supply chain, right? Before we jump into the world of the blockchain. Supply chain, there is, in supply chains today, post-COVID, post different kind of national policies, everything else, there is a lot of excitement, right? Exciting things are happening. So the business process digitization is taking place. Anywhere commerce is driving lots of changes, ubiquitous connectivity and so forth. And there tends to be quite a bit of focus on those exciting future topics, right? Because they're exciting. At the same time, there is also this ongoing kind of roll up your sleeves present that has very specific things that need to be addressed right now, and that honestly are not as exciting as things on the left side. There is definitely less predictability of supply chain performance, right? Because you've all heard about kind of the paper shortages and the beginning of the COVID, right? The whole kind of dismantling of supply chains, just focusing on China and moving into different jurisdictions, things like that. So things that used to be taken for granted are no longer so. The idea with this kind of fracturing of supply chains, there is increasing costs, right? Because companies are building up the inventory to higher levels than they used to in the past, right? They are also kind of onboarding new suppliers, things like that. All of this costs money. And then the final one, there is definitely growing burden of compliance and disclosure. So that's why when we look into the supply chain, there is excitement and lots of cool things happening. At the same time, there are some hardcore things that need to be addressed right now. So a couple more words about exciting future. So you've all probably heard, if you're in supply chain, about the business process digitization, when companies are moving more into the fully automated warehouses with the automated guided vehicles and storage systems, really taking care of all the hard work of warehouse management and so forth. There is more and more happening in terms of automating transportation and things like that. Anywhere commerce has a huge impact because all of a sudden there is an expectation that you can buy from your mobile phone. The smart appliances are coming online in increasing numbers and things like that. And what it means to supply chains is that the last mile delivery is becoming the topic, because today, if you look into the last mile, it's still too expensive. It's still prohibitive to a number of, especially small and mid-sized players, to play effectively in e-commerce. And there is quite a number of different technologies, applications, approaches, processes that are being spun up in the global supply chains to support the anywhere commerce and specifically the last mile delivery component of it. And ubiquitous connectivity. This is amazing as well, because with the advance of the 5G and now with the kind of the Starlink coming on board and everything else, all of a sudden we have this connectivity in places where it was either spotty or wasn't available in the past, right? And the capacity and ability to process information is increasing as well. What it means to supply chain is that now you can actually have the full scale visibility all the way through as your merchandise is traveling through supply chain, right? As it goes through the big hubs like from Asia to North America and things like that. But you also have a more granular visibility as it goes from kind of smaller warehouses to smaller to even smaller warehouse to last mile and everything else. So now you can actually afford and you have connectivity available to you to trace it all the way through. So this is the exciting future. All of this is happening. Lots of work is happening there. So the painful challenges, they roll up your sleeves today. Again, less predictability needs to be resolved. Increasing cost, growing burden of compliance. How is it being solved today? First thing is that companies are introducing more and more technologies and ways to eliminate supply chain choke points, right? The increasing diversification across suppliers and locations, and that drives need for providing visibility across this forever changing environment, right? And this is where improvement of supply chain network agility comes into play. What is network agility? Simply, it's just ability to react to changes realities in real time. And this is where further digitization and transparency becomes important. And also you hear more and more about establishing robust control tower capabilities, where companies are looking into this ability to view supply chain events contextualized in financial flows, document flows, and everything else in real time. And again, the final piece that never goes away, finding cost efficiencies, right? To fund higher cost of materials, logistics, and manufacturing by further simplifying and streamlining business processes, and also improving working capital management, which is where the whole conversation about the trade finance, especially financing smaller players within supply chain, is becoming quite important. So if this is kind of the position, like with the exciting future and what needs to happen right away in the supply chain, how does the blockchain fit in? So blockchain, as you all know, provides, like at the highest level, 3 key value propositions. It's a real-time single version of truth to reduce disputes and rework. It's tamper-proof and traceable history that allows to simplify workflow and compliance by taking out non-value-added steps that are providing checks and balances, because they're no longer required because of the inherent trust of the blockchain. And the final one is a tamper-proof process automation via smart contracts. So all of a sudden, now we can not just immutably have a history or have an immutable view of what's happening today. We can also use this to automate it, and the automation itself is immutable in its own turn, right? So, and that gives you accelerated error-proof execution. Blockchain by itself is wonderful, but it's not the only technology. It's not a silver bullet. Blockchain really brings, like, shines when it works in concert with a number of other technologies. And because the whole conversation is about overall fundamental digitization, then we need to be looking into the technologies that are allowing us to digitize the physical world. And as the Internet of Things devices, different types of sensors for temperature, speed, location, behavior, things like that. There is the optical character recognition, digital identity, and authentication that comes into concert to ensure that there is immutable document flow that has been digitized and can be stapled to this overall supply chain event train. There is geolocation, and also, quite importantly, application and data integration, because more and more players, as they're becoming increasingly digitized, they need to work together in concert, right? And application and data integration becomes even more important, because it's no longer just confined primarily to the inside the perimeter of a single enterprise. It has to span across multiple enterprises, and that really changes the whole approach to it, right? And also the pressure is high because it's not just ability to be integrated, it's also ability to be integrated in real time, at scale, with proper security, privacy, and everything else applied. So overall, blockchain working in concert with all those technologies really starts providing huge benefit to the enterprises. And really, if you step back, the role of blockchain in this family of technologies is the foundation, is the fabric that keeps all of this together. And it supports equally the exciting future things by creating of the supply chain digital twin, right? And allowing us to manage it at an application layer versus just focusing on physical events. And also with roll up your sleeves present, when we have verified provenance and responsibility, we have digitized document flow and compliance events to be digitized as well, transparency for effective control tower capabilities, and also better managed credit risk due to better data, right? Because for a financial institution to fund something, they need to understand what they're funding. right? And having real-time access to real-time actual data of what's happening on the ground allows to make those decisions with much more, like with much higher quality, and to mitigate the risk as much as possible. So blockchain is the digital foundation for the digitization of the supply chains. I also wanted to kind of maybe give an example. So this is theory and those are concepts. Let me give an example of what DLT Labs did with Walmart Canada. So basically with Walmart Canada, we deployed a full production solution that is today a national standard for managing third-party freight. So all third-party freight for Walmart Canada is being processed in real time and full production on our platform, and the old solutions were decommissioned. And this is where blockchain is exciting, because if you look into freight invoice reconciliation, it's a fairly complex process. There could be up to 200 different variables coming into play at different points in time. And if you look into the document flow and invoicing flow, there is a sequence, right? Something gets, like the load gets tendered, bill of lading is being generated, transportation is taking place. There are different events happening along the road. Ideally, if the GPS devices and IoT devices are deployed, this information is captured, and then it's used to kind of revalidate the pre-agreed contract terms and everything else. Then delivery takes place, which is the equal sign on this picture with the green arrow ending to it, and invoice is generated. What is happening now with the blockchain? That instead of waiting for everything to take place to then start generating the invoice and potentially get into disputes, because the equal sign does not happen right away. In real life, it happens after a couple of weeks, and in some cases after several months. So by that time, everybody forgot what the context was. Was it raining in Alabama, or was there snow? Was there a detour? It's already completely forgotten. Now, the blockchain, because it's a shared single version of truth, allows Walmart and the carriers to start generating a common record right at the beginning. So as soon as the contract is tendered, it's captured on the shared system. And all parties that are authorized to see it can see it right away, right? As soon as bill of lading is generated, it's there as well. So invoice is being built up right in front of your eyes. And there are smart contracts running, looking for discrepancies, things like that could alert participants to get resolution as soon as possible while the context is still known. IoT devices provide real-time information as transportation takes place. And again, if there is a detour, extra mileage, things like that, they become known right away. And if they need to be authorized by dispatch, it happens in the real time. So by the time delivery takes place, invoice is generated. And all that's required is just to review it, authorize it, and push it into the ready for payment status. And to give you kind of the business result of doing it this way, Walmart, before deploying this approach, had up to 70% of the invoices in dispute at any given time. So 70% of invoices were outstanding because people were chasing bits and pieces of information to verify it. Now it's under 1%. It used to be under 2%, but now it's tightened up, so it's less than 1%. This is huge benefit. And the benefit is actually across the board, which is another value of the blockchain, right? If you're a carrier, you're getting paid faster. So your operational financial management is really taken care of, and you can pay your drivers and everything else. If you're Walmart, you're not spending all this money on time of all those associates chasing down facts, resolving disputes, and things like that. Also, because information is now pre-verified, and again, it's no longer 70% information been questionable, it's under 1%. What happens is that now they can actually offer financing for the receivables, right? Either discounting the invoices or submitting it to other financial institutions. So all those opportunities opened up. And just to show you another value of what blockchain allowed to kind of achieve through this engagement is that if you look into the past workflow, there is a number of steps there. And the steps colored blue, they are value added when something is being picked up, transported, and delivered. And then the brown and yellow steps, they're non-value add. They're only there to ensure that what we said would happen was actually taking place. It's the reconciliation steps, notifications, and so forth. Because there is now no two versions of truth, there is only one, all those steps went away. So an 11-step business process got shrunk down to 5. And again, if you are kind of the Lean Six Sigma black belt, this is a huge ability to take the waste out of the business processes, right? So in summary, if we were to summarize kind of the value to Walmart, there was huge reduction of disputes. There was accelerated payment process to the carriers. There was real-time invoicing and auto approvals, which reduced administrative load on both sides, right? Much lower frequency of audit exceptions, and also end-to-end supply chain visibility. Because now, as we established this core record of the supply chain events happening assigned to a specific order, to a specific load, we can now start stapling additional information to this record. For example, the information about the cold chain viability, the fact that your frozen pizzas have not been unfrozen at any time during transportation gets stapled to the same record, and now it creates the full 360 that could be used for analytics, AI, and additional purposes within the Walmart. And that's exactly what's happening. So, and John Bayliss, who is SVP of Logistics and Supply Chain, he went public. He kind of delivered a couple of speeches on this topic, where he said that Walmart Canada actually got way more than they were hoping to get out of this process, because it wasn't just resolving the freight invoice reconciliation issue. It was really now creating this information platform that allows to start achieving additional values in terms of the traffic optimization, again, cold chain visibility, and additional things. So blockchain deployment was intended to just deliver a single business value, but now it's delivering way more that was even understood or visible in the beginning. What I also wanted to maybe say a couple of words of what made this project successful, right? Because there is a number of kind of POCs and pilots in the industry. So first one is that there was definitely a reduced change management, because the approach was business driven versus technology centric. It was John Bayliss's people in transportation that were really driving it, that were defining what was important and so forth. And because it was pure configuration versus custom development, they were able to get exactly what they wanted. Instead of kind of traditional approach, when technology engages with the vendor, they develop a solution, they invite business on and off to provide some requirements, and then the final solution requires quite a bit of honing to make sure that it actually does what the business wants to do. What made it possible, and what also accelerated time to market, it's DLT Labs provisioning of the configurable platform versus custom developing a solution. So when I was a CIO, and when we looked into this project initially, I spoke to a number of providers, and the quotes I was getting for developing something from scratch by people who understand blockchain and everything else was 12 to 18 months. Here, we were able to go forward with full production pilot. And again, not POC, but pilot in 2 months. So 12 to 18 versus 2. That was for me kind of the fast time to market difference of configurable platform versus custom development. And also true ROI realized by doing a production pilot versus POC. That's probably the most important critical success factor. Because if you look into the blockchain projects, most of them, if you listen to the language, is saying we will be. Once this is in place, we will be. Why? Because it's done as a proof of concepts. And proof of concepts are usually done in a kind of sheltered environment. They're not subjected to kind of the rigidity of the integration, privacy, security, and everything else. So, and as a result, once the POC is done and the business says, wow, that was a good proof of concept, now let's take it into production. Most frequently, it requires a complete redevelopment of this thing, right? Because it was done in a different way just to show a concept. A pilot is different, because pilot is done up to the spec with proper security and everything else. And the only difference that all of this is applied to a smaller scope, so that we can see how on a smaller scope this whole thing works. And as a result, if it's done as a pilot, once everybody is happy with the final outcomes of the pilot and the decision is made to turn it on, it's just scaling up, onboarding additional players and things like that. It's no longer redevelopment. And that was probably the biggest critical success factor, that this whole thing was done as a full production pilot versus a proof of concept deployment. So that's what I wanted to share in 15 minutes, really briefly, and looking forward to answering any questions and having a good discussion. Back to you, Lewis.
All right, thank you very much, Sergey. That was a incredibly comprehensive and also detailed presentation. It's one of those ones where I'm going through my questions now and realizing that you touched on pretty much everything that I wanted to touch on here. So this is me almost ripping up the questions and turning this back around to other people who are watching. And if you've got questions that were raised during Sergey's presentation, or if you have other questions that you'd like to ask, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we'll make sure to get those in front of the panelists. So Sergey is one of the panelists and you heard him and he introduced himself. The other panelist that we have here is Patrick Duffy. And he is, Patrick Duffy is with BITA, and he has a background with a bunch of other logistics organizations as well. So I'm gonna let Patrick introduce himself really quickly. And then I've got a couple of questions that I wanna ask that are just sort of generally following up on what Sergey was talking about, but both Patrick and Sergey should feel free to speak to them. So Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to get this started?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lewis, and thank you, Brian and Lisa, for having us. It's always a pleasure to be part of y'all's communities events. I did, as Brian talked about in the intro, had the opportunity in the summer of 2019 to present on both the FreightWave Sonar supply chain intelligence platform and also the BITA community. BITA is the Blockchain and Transport Alliance, which is one of the largest commercial alliances focused on exploring, evangelizing, and looking for commercial outcomes for its members around the adoption and use of next generation technology with a focus on blockchain. One of the core elements of our community is a technology agnostic stance. So we don't necessarily endorse a certain type of technology platform. We're really excited about working in a collaboratively competitive way, this term co-opetition, to drive outcomes that benefit all industry stakeholders, regardless of geography, transport mode, or traditional technology stacks. And to really drive those types of outcomes, what our community is decided on focusing on is around the creation of open source and royalty-free data elements that underpin the business processes that drive global commerce and the resulting supply chain and transportation processes that actually allow for the consumption of those goods from places of production, and even considering the reverse logistics applications of it. And so I certainly never thought that I would be leading such an effort. Like a lot of people in supply chain, I think that they've found themselves in this role. And I've certainly borrowed heavily from Brian's quote that the world is a supply chain. And I take it one step further, and I really say that the world is a supply chain, but the world or civilizations run on data standards. Whether it's water quality or electricity, these processes that underlie our everyday lives that we just expect to happen are the result of, incredible business processes that are multi-layered and relying upon so much collaboration between stakeholders. And that collaboration, as Sergey demonstrated with, reducing a business process from 11 steps to 5 steps, it's messy. And so if you can create very clean data and can introduce data hygiene in between stakeholders, you can drive efficiencies. And that's really what was the spurring moment around BITA. It was focused in, or came together in the summer of 2017 as the kind of the peak of the hype cycle, or at least the first hype cycle around blockchain and DLT technology was really being introduced into the commercial sphere. And a number of over-the-road trucking executives in North America got together with technology providers to that space and said, let's look at blockchain technology and see if there's a way to leverage this to reduce these business processes that eat away at the margin of our very large top-line business and very compressed bottom-line business. And as Sergey has demonstrated with the incredible project that DLT Labs has built out for Walmart Canada and their transportation providers, if you introduce these types of data hygiene and business collaboration processes, you can see huge transformations in the way these operations occur. I think Sergey said that it's now down to under 2% of exception management for a freight and audit payment process that traditionally had something like around 3 out of 4 invoices at any given time being in dispute. So that's one example in one transport mode of what's possible when you introduce these types of technologies with really good underlying data standards. And I'm really excited about taking that to a transport mode agnostic platform as we work to build out the underlying plumbing of commerce moving forward. And so that was a long-winded way of introducing myself, but I hope it provided some context.
No, that was very thorough and much appreciated, Patrick. So I want to go back to 2016, 2017, when that first hype cycle that you were talking about, Patrick, came up, because that's when I was first introduced to blockchain. I was covering logistics media, and there, like you said, there was really an incredible hype. And it still feels like we're waiting for the hype to catch up with reality. So I was wondering if either of you could talk a little bit about the progress that has been made, and then what needs to transpire to get us to where we want to be as an industry.
Sergey, do you want to kick things off?
Of course. Thank you, Patrick. So in my personal opinion, one of the things that works really well for blockchain and that also becomes a detriment is the fact that it's a kind of backend technology. If you look into the hype, right? Hype, at least from what I've seen, has been driven by crypto, right? So everybody knows about the Bitcoin. Everybody saw pictures of the instant multi-billionaires on the front page of the Forbes magazine and so forth. But so this is where kind of the whole fame is coming from. And fame is actually dividing people, right? Because some people start loving it and getting very interested. Some people are hating it, saying, oh, it's just a fad, it's just for the speculators and things like that. And what happens because of this? Everybody's focusing on this use case, which is cryptocurrency, which is awesome use case, and forgets about the underlying technology. It's still kind of sitting in the shadows. When we talk about applying blockchain in supply chains, same thing as you saw in my presentation. It's a fabric that captures information and creates this kind of permanent immutable record and allows it to be shared effectively between multiple participants. It's not truly visible. What is visible? It's, again, your IoTs. It's those specific sensors that are people sticking into their kind of trailers that are being part of the airplanes, ships, and everything else, right? It's the physical infrastructure that's usually visible. Even OCR is visible as well, because now there's some app that is running on your phone that allows you to scan a signature, snap a picture, and everything is happening. And then kind of the plumbing comes in. And again, blockchain is part of plumbing. Now all those pictures, all those events, everything else are being properly captured, they're being shared, and all of a sudden now the business process is flowing. And because of this lack of visibility that blockchain, again, people start questioning it because they don't see it, right? And this is what kind of overhypes it because everybody talks about it. And then this is what brings it down because nobody can actually see it in the solution. Patrick, what do you think?
I think that brings up a really good point, and I'm fond of a presentation that is super disarming that our chairman of the Bit of Standards Council Board, Dale Christie, who's the blockchain fellow at FedEx, uses. And it's one of his introductory slides when he's presenting to C-suite executives, both internally and externally to other stakeholders and individuals, even students that are looking at this technology and trying to figure out, what's hype and what's reality. And he's got this slide and it says, like, blockchain is dull and not sexy. And, when it gets so entwined in the glitz and glamour and rocket ships to the moon and crypto Lambos that, they sell clicks. They sell so many clicks, and it's, some really interesting reading. But, underlying this is data protocols that aren't terribly different than when you think back about, what happens when you type in Amazon.com, You don't type in HTTPS 196.164. There's a protocol that's transforming the human legible information that you and I like to interact with because we're not robots into that machine readable that allows for these machine-to-machine transactions to occur in the billions and billions of transactions that drive our modern experience. And I think that's the differentiating point that really, has come home to roost since I've really become involved in these efforts, is separating people's expectations about the panacea nature of, oh, let's just apply blockchain to this problem. And the stark reality is that the world still runs on mainframes and green screens and EDI transactions that have challenges. The unidirectional nature of the way that EDI information flows is probably one of the most exciting opportunities that blockchain has to create this industry networking 2.0, or some people talk about industry 4.0 type of collaborative opportunities for stakeholders to create these massive and very high fidelity filled data oceans or data lakes, where people can query those data lakes to get the type of information that they need to make their business decisions. And I think that's what gets really exciting, is because if you can create, something, it might be idyllic, but you can envision this, a global commercial data ocean where all of the information underlying actual commerce is permissioned, it's protected, and can be queried by the right individuals to get the right types of answers to feed their needs. And so whether that's US Customs and Border making queries to make sure that the container that's sitting at the New Jersey port facility actually has what's in the box that says that's actually there, or whether you look at something like the COVID vaccine and wanting to ensure that there haven't been environmental deviations during that cold chain as you move it between stakeholders. You want to make sure that the data on the receiving end is of high fidelity and you can trust it. And there's this fantastic presentation that talks about the cost of trust. And blockchain at its core is a technology that drives trust between individuals that don't necessarily trust each other, not necessarily because they don't want to trust each other, but because when I order, a handbag for my girlfriend and it's built at a manufacturing facility on the other side of the globe, there's 5 tiers of supply chain providers to that bag. And increasingly, as we've gotten a supercomputer in our pockets, we want to have access into the information about that product. Is it sustainable? Is there child labor involved into it? Has it has it benefited any nefarious parties in a way that we don't want to support with our hard-earned dollars? And so underlying all of it is a layer, and what really is being provided by blockchain and other DLT style solutions are trust layers that applications can live on. And whether that's an application that drives e-commerce or customs and border protection or payment and freight audit, you have to think about it as stacks of information. And blockchain is providing a trust layer that allows for different applications to live on top of it.
Patrick, are you able to give any examples, any real world examples of these sorts of processes being implemented and taking place? Because I think you're getting at what's really important here.
Yeah, and actually yesterday I had the opportunity to present at the FreightWaves Health and Pharma Supply Chain Summit, and I was able to interview Suzanne Somerville. Suzanne is the CEO of a company called Chronicled. And Chronicle is the custodian of a product called MetaLedger. And MetaLedger now serves about 50% of the major pharmaceutical companies in a way that allows for them to ensure the data fidelity of their business transactions as product moves between manufacturers, wholesalers, and end users, and any reverse logistics situations that may occur because of spoiled product or any type of exception management. They can rely on this data because of very solidly built out business processes that are have built-in governance and business rules because they're governed through a DLT solution. And so that's, you know, a very specific example. I think it's very prudent or understandable given, you know, the way that cold chain and medical supply chains have come into the living rooms of everyone over the past 14 months or 12 months now. You know, I certainly didn't ever expect to have a conversation about cold chains with my grandmother about vaccine distributions. I mean, but that's the reality. Everybody is cognizant of, you know, supply chain over the past year, whether it's toilet paper, as it was called out, or vaccine distribution. You want to be able to have an understanding of, you know, where assets exist, where demand exists, and to meet those needs of information sharing in a very clean, high fidelity manner. And so that's certainly one example on the trade side, since we're talking about more of the atoms versus the bytes side of the equation, real world versus digital. In Singapore, over the past month, there was the passage of the Electronic Transactions Bill, which is now in the Parliament of Singapore to enact something called the UN-CITRAL, which is like the UN Commission on International Trade Law. It's a law around the electronic transferable records that everybody is so excited about. And whether those are bills of lading, which, you know, are constantly in the news, promissory notes around trade finance. Previously, and this is the case even here in the United States, but also in the EU, those types of digital documents haven't been able to be leveraged to their full extent because they are built upon, frankly, thousands of years of legal and social precedent. You need a physical document to actually provide for the custodial transfer of ownership. And so the adoption of this law, which is kind of a model law, which can be adopted globally with some amendments at their locality, marks a really interesting turning point, I think, because Singapore, the Port of Singapore and the Port of, I think it's Rotterdam, have been doing some really exciting pilots, not proof of concepts, as Sergey points out, pilots about leveraging these types of trade documentations to facilitate efficiencies in global trade. And so the challenge, you know, that became very apparent immediately was that while Singapore, as a city state with a very, you know, progressive but, you know, authoritative governance structure, can say, okay, this is working and we can adopt it in 100 days. Let's get it done. On the other side of that physical supply chain move, when that container moves from the Port of Singapore to the Port of Rotterdam, you know, 3 weeks later, there are 5 layers of legislative entities that need an actual paper document to actually allow for that custodial transference of ownership and for that goods to move from in the port where it's, you know, kind of in this contained environment into the actual commercial environment of that country or the EU more broadly. And so one of the big drivers, I think, of this technology over the next 3 to 5 years is going to be a recognition of these electronic transaction tools. And I think what is going to be really exciting, and there's a piece of research which is coming out, it either came out today or will be coming out tomorrow, from the Blockchain Research Institute, a fantastic organization that really takes a research or almost academic approach to fighting the hype around this technology. But they're pushing out a piece of research that is talking about how the Biden-Harris administration is arriving at a very unique time in history. And the pandemic has exacerbated and really exposed problems around collaboration, particularly around supply chains and being able to figure out where assets are and meet those demands. And so it's created a demand pull for transformation and digital transformation. But at the same time, we're moving very quickly into this, some people call it a second era of the digital age. And you've got kind of this holy trinity of technology really starting to speed up. That artificial intelligence, sensor tech driven by Internet of Things and industrial Internet of Things sensors, and blockchain technology, I feel like, is the glue that allows for things like those sensors to talk to these giant data pools that organizations want to leverage with things like AI and machine learning to move from this is a snapshot of our enterprise and our supply chains to this is what's possible to this is what we should do. So from now snapshot to predictive to prescriptive. And what drives that is having really high fidelity data points that your machines can iterate on and improve and improve and improve. And that's how, Sergey and the DLT Labs team has been able to reduce that exception management number from something as high as 3 and 4 to under 2%. And, hopefully, and I believe this is probably the case, and Sergey can probably speak to it better than me, that number probably will continue to get smaller and smaller over time as the systems optimize. And I think that's the real promise of it.
Yeah, and just to add to Patrick, because Patrick, you are raising a number of very, very good topics. One of them, like in Singapore, it's about the regulators now stepping up to the task and understanding and appreciating the value of the blockchains. So specifically, like the Food and Drug Administration in the US, they have published I believe, next generation roadmap, where they're talking about kind of the whole strategic approach of reducing foodborne illnesses in the United States. And they're trailblazing because, and again, once they deploy, probably other jurisdictions like Canada and globally will follow the suit. But basically, if you read the roadmap, what they state is that right now it's very important to minimize the impact of those foodborne illnesses, and also to understand the root causes and make sure that if an outbreak took place, it never happens again. And they specifically name blockchain as one of those core fundamental technologies that would allow to provide the transparency, visibility, and ability to react in real time across the supply chain and multiple participants for any specific threat or an actual foodborne illness outbreak. And you see more and more the regulators in different industries stepping up in Singapore and the US and elsewhere.
Thank you. Sergey, during your presentation, you were talking, or you touched on how quickly you were able to get these solutions to the market and get them, working in the supply chains. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between running proof of concepts or pilots and then operating full-scale production solutions like the one that you're currently running for enterprise clients. And if you could touch on maybe like what are the stumbling blocks, how do you overcome those, and also what's the secret to connecting legacy technology stacks and business processes into a relatively new technological paradigm?
Very good question, Lewis. An interesting part of that is that when we had conversations with the business, with the supply chain and transportation folks at Walmart Canada, the task was not selling them up on a blockchain. The task was solving the real problems, right? And again, the problem they had was the fact that too many invoices are in dispute. The relationships between Walmart and carriers are strained, and there is lost revenue across the board, right? And the task was saying, okay, you know what? How do we actually make it better? How do we improve invoice reconciliation? And this is where kind of awareness and understanding of technologies like blockchain by technology department came in like a beautiful marriage, right? Because there was a business need, and we knew in technology that, okay, actually, there is blockchain, and blockchain provides specific values. And instead of fixing and improving reconciliation, we can get rid of it altogether, which was the whole different approach, right? And again, and any conversation with the business wasn't, hey, there is this blockchain thing, it's very cool, let's go and deploy it. It was more about, yes, we understand your problem, and we have a way of solving it in a fast and effective way. So, and focusing on the business value and business outcomes usually helps, right? Versus focusing on technological excitement of a specific technology. Second thing was, okay, how do we deploy it? And blockchain by itself is still a new technology. It's not kind of generally adopted by everybody. It's not like cloud today. It's like what cloud used to be 5 years ago. right? As a result, people don't want to take undue risks because they really don't know whether this is something that will work or will not work. That's why they're trying to kind of scope it down, run it in a sheltered environment. And the easiest thing to do is to also run this as a POC. Why? Because if you're doing something as a POC, you don't have to go through security reviews, right? You're not concerned about architecture compatibility. You're not trying to look into the kind of multi-user user onboarding and all this boring stuff that needs to happen, right? You're just focusing on the exciting thing. That's why it's very important to not do it this way if you're really serious about it, but step back and say, yep, here's the business problem. Blockchain appears to be the best technology to solve it, so let's solve it for real. And if we solve it for real for a smaller scope, then there is a much higher chance of this thing growing and then becoming something that is truly reliable, truly acknowledged, and truly recognized. Patrick, what do you think?
No, I mean, I certainly have seen it in my experience. I mean, it's easier for C-suites or even, division or team leaders to greenlight POCs. They're lower risk, but oftentimes POCs will run and they will demonstrate, siloed success. But the real value of this technology is connecting silos. So, it really needs to step back and, as Sergey said, identify a common problem and then investigate whether or not this is the right technology solution. Take it one step further and say, given other alternatives, does this make economic sense? And then actually explore it, and explore it with, some KPIs or an agile kind of stance that says, okay, given these results, what are the next steps? Can we, expand it? What other silos exist? Where do we have data black holes? How can we connect our other supply chain stakeholders to provide, better relationships, as Sergey called out, operational efficiencies? And, every business operator at their core, they're trying to drive bottom line. And so, those are the three major ideas I think really need to be considered when organizations start investigating whether or not this type of technology makes sense. I think we will see more ecosystem level style projects emerge over the next 3 to 5 years as things like interoperability between protocols are solved for. I think people are worried and have been previously worried about vendor lock-in and investing too much money into a certain type of solution only to figure out that it doesn't currently work with some of their most important stakeholders. And then you've got, two types of technologies trying to solve for the same thing, and you've still got, data mishmash.
So I've got a question here from Alexander that dovetails nicely with the conversation we're having right now. And Alexander wants to know, what is the benefit of blockchain versus traditional SaaS? And I think that's a good question, because having covered air freight for a few years, they were probably the most resistant to change of any sector I'd ever covered, which was interesting considering the technology that's at play there. So if you're having this internal conversation as a business, or you're approaching a business, how do you sort of weigh the costs and benefits of these different approaches? And what's the pitch here for blockchain versus SaaS?
I'd like Sergey's opinion on this, and I'd maybe even add one more question to it. When you were still in your CIO role, was there a moment you could have pointed to that said, this technology is going to work for us?
Yeah, very good questions. And I think actually the answer was right in the questions. It's all about cost benefit, right? If you ask a developer, is something possible? The answer is always yes, because anything and everything could be coded. But then the next, in the line of questioning, next thing becomes, so what's the fastest and the least expensive and the most robust and secure way of delivering this? And now the conversation changes. All of a sudden, now we're talking to specialists buying best of breed systems and things like that. Same thing applies to blockchain as a technology, right? So yes, you can code immutability into your business process, into your business applications and databases. Yes, you can establish a single shared application that has access by multiple participants, and it has been done in the past. But lots of those things are available out of the box from the virtue of the blockchain technology itself, right? So the fact that it utilizes cryptography to ensure immutability and other things out of the box, ready to be consumed, allows for everything to be like for things that require this kind of functionality to be deployed faster, cheaper, and better. And this is where the decision is coming from, right? And if it's faster, cheaper, and better, why use something else that is more expensive, slower, and doesn't give you the same kind of robustness and same result? And again, I'm sorry for the simplistic answer, but in reality, if you kind of unwind all the fluff around it, it comes to time, cost, and reliability.
And I think it's prudent to really address those questions with eyes open. You know, there hasn't been any shortage of rose-colored glasses in looking at and trying to sell this technology. It's not a panacea. It doesn't work in every situation. There are certainly a lot of business situations right now where it's not a required technology, but there are a lot of opportunities to drive trust between stakeholders, improve communications, and drive efficiencies that you'll actually see a return on that investment. And I think it's important to approach it that way. Don't approach it with, yes, this is going to be the solution already.
Yeah. And also, as the technology matures by itself, the way this technology is being consumed is maturing as well. So again, let me bring it back to the cloud, right? In the past, people were scared of letting go of their own data centers to the cloud because again, they felt that there was not enough control and potentially more exposure and everything else. And as cloud business proposition became more robust, security was wrapped up and so forth, all of a sudden it became known. When we have conversations about blockchain-based business solutions today, one of the first questions I'm usually hearing, am I getting my own node? Right? Because again, the idea is there is still no trust in a blockchain operated by somebody, right? With proper reliability, immutability, everything else. People still feel that they need to keep a piece of it themselves. My prediction is that again, as the technology matures, the consumption methods will be maturing as well. And eventually blockchain will be increasingly becoming more of a blockchain as a service versus kind of a private deployment of a blockchain component within my controllable environment. And this is going to be very interesting. And once kind of a critical mass of enterprises will get to the point when, again, they trust the blockchain as a service, we will see a hugely increased levels of adoption all across the board, because that will make it easier, much more scalable, and the core value of the blockchain would be more easily realizable than it is today when people are trying to keep pieces of blockchain within their controllable environment.
Lewis, the audience is itching to jump in. Alex, especially, who is a blockchain investor, wants to dig in on one or two topics. So Alex, please jump in.
Thank you so much. Sergey, you partially answered my question just now by saying, well, everybody wants their own node, which actually helps. But may I ask you, so in the Walmart case, who runs these nodes other than Walmart?
Yeah, so there are options available. And if you look into the DLT labs, we are authorized kind of operator of multitude of nodes because we went through the security certifications, approvals, and everything else as an operator, right? But nodes are also available for large carriers to be operated by them as well, if they choose.
And do they actually operate them today?
Some of them operated eventually, like if you look into the setting of today, we operate like, again, situation is changing, well, probably about 90% of the nodes. But yes, some of the nodes would still be operated by key carriers. But I also seen some of the nodes being transported back to us.
Thank you, because the your first answer to my question sounded a little bit like, well, you like the features of blockchain systems such as cryptography and finality, which of course you can program into any database. And only later did you mention that they actually want to run nodes. It sounded a little bit like, you know, a one node blockchain would still answer the requirements of these systems. And I wanted to know to what extent that's true or not.
It's not true, right? Because if you look, and again, I don't want to go too technical on this one, a single node would not be, through single node, you are losing a number of other things, right? So for example, there is also kind of the survivability of the network itself. And the fact that there is multiple nodes allows you to be completely immune, for example, from ransomware attacks and things like that. If you're on a single node, all of a sudden it's a single point of failure. And it's, although technically possible, it's not something I would ever recommend. Hope it helps.
Yeah, thank you. It makes me think. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Alexander. Thanks, Sergey. I got another question here from Jeff, who asks, how do you help to get partners and suppliers, especially smaller ones, through the supply chain to buy into their part of getting their information into the blockchain platform? And he says, especially if they are using a wide variety of different systems in their organizations.
Yeah.
Do you want to start out with this, Patrick? Or,
well, I think what I would say is that, that's one of the challenges and opportunities that I've really faced in trying to frame up meaningful projects to explore the use of this technology. It's oftentimes, particularly in important or cross-border supply chains, there are, layers of participants that are providing pieces of the total supply chain data picture at each stage. And so it builds in a modular fashion. So it's very important to make sure that you aren't excluding some of the full data picture by not having all of those stakeholders contributing to that system, particularly when you're trying to move towards a digital twin of your supply chain that can provide that real supply chain control tower and visibility functions. But I live in the more theoretical side of the equation. Sergey's got experience with actually, having the conversations with the CTOs and CIOs of companies that range in size from, small, under a dozen asset operating, over-the-road trucking companies up to the really large ones. And Sergey, I'll let you talk about the differences in who you have to sell in those organizations to get them into the network.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so what usually sells a proposition to different companies, to different people, it's the fact that they're going to be saving money, or the whole experience will become like, there'll be less friction in their overall experience. Like in our specific case, especially when we spoke to smaller carriers, like the value proposition was very simple, right? That if you get onboarded onto the network and you start operating this way, you will get paid faster. And again, in some cases with 70% invoices in dispute, some of the invoices were outstanding in dispute for up to 8 months. Imagine if you're a small company that really needs to pay your truck drivers, owner operators, everybody else, and you have an invoice stuck for 8 months. You need to finance it, and then it just starts growing like a snowball, right? So what happens here is that the single value proposition getting paid faster was enough. Second question was, okay, what would be required from my side? Do I, a small carrier, need to have blockchain experts to be able to operate it? And the answer was absolutely no, right? So the network is being operated. We can show you how it ensures immutability and the fact that you're in control of your own data. But if you go through our cookie cutter onboarding approach, if you're a small carrier, 72 hours and you're up and running. And you don't have to have any kind of extra technology expertise to be able to do that. If you're a major carrier like CN Rail and so forth, with lots of legacy systems, quite a bit of internal complexity, everything else, it's a bit more involved. We're talking about a couple of weeks, right? So, and this ability of providing very clear value proposition where in a low friction way in terms of onboarding and then ongoing sustainment is really what sold it to the participants. If you make it too complex, or if the business value story is not straightforward, then you'll be facing difficulties, right?
Thank you, Sergey. The next question, and they're really coming in fast here, so I'm going to apologize in advance if I don't get to all of them, and I'm trying to consolidate some. But the next one from Colin it's something that's come up a couple of times. I touched on it myself half an hour ago, but it does feel really central to the conversation we're having. And it is, and Colin asked the case, or Colin says, the case for blockchain in supply chain is well understood, and pilots or even projects like Walmart seem to be providing operational feasibility. And I think we can all agree that's the case. But once more, he's asking what is needed to gain industry-wide acceptance. So what still needs to be done to get to really realize the potential of this technology here?
Maybe Patrick, you can start.
Yeah, so the way that I view it is there's two major drivers of technology adoption, or catalysts for businesses to adopt technology. And they're either regulatory or legislative in nature, or they are by way of, the gorillas in that space, the ones that control a meaningful amount of generally transaction spend volume. In our use cases, we're generally talking about transportation spend volume, that have decided to adopt a certain type of technology. I know we keep going back to Walmart, but I think a wonderful example of this has been their just-in-time inventory requirements, and the way that technology leveraged by their transportation service providers has had to change to address the type of reporting requirements that mandate introduced. And on the opposite side, on the legislative side, I called out the electronic document or electronic transactions law that's being adopted in Singapore. In the United States, there was a piece of legislation called the Drug Security Supply Chain Act that had mandated a solution which didn't specifically spell out blockchain or DLT technology, but was set up in a way that was almost made for it. Unfortunately, and I think that there probably would be benefits that all of us would be experiencing right now in the time of COVID if it had been adopted in 2018. That's been punted to 2023 before it has to be adopted by industry. But that is a very clear example of a legislative mandate where this type of technology is being explored and iterated on for eventual adoption within a very specific sector and sectoral use case.
Yeah, very good. And from my end, I'd also like to add, maybe because it's a very strategic question, so unfortunately there will be a very strategic answer to it, non-specific. And I'd like to draw a parallel between blockchain and internet. Both those technologies are fundamental technologies, and there was quite a bit of research published that actually proves the point that this is a fundamental technology. And for a fundamental technology to gain kind of critical mass, when it becomes mass adopted at the industry level and so forth, it goes through stages. And stage one is deploying technology and dropping on a killer use case. So if you look into the internet, the killer use case for internet was email. Now it's really hard to imagine that this whole world of e-commerce and everything else started with the killer use case of email. It's way more than people could have conceived. The killer use case for blockchain is cryptocurrency, right? It's famous, it's driving, it gets all the eyeballs and the clicks and everything else, right? But this is just a killer use case. And what happens because of this? It allows technology to mature, lots of smart people to put their work into it to develop specific market solutions. And now it's just a matter of time. And what will happen is that more and more real solutions based on blockchain outside of crypto would be appearing until the critical mass is achieved, and then adoption goes up to the next level. That would be probably my prediction.
Sergey, could you expand a little bit on the last thing that you said, where you're talking about how investment in crypto is benefiting these other uses of blockchain? Like, can you give us examples of how that's actually playing out?
Yeah, the fact that crypto is this killer use case and there is quite a bit of developing happening there gets people interested. So all of a sudden you see top technical universities spinning up blockchain departments, right? When young developers who have a choice, because if I'm up there, I can go and I could start specializing in AI, in front-end development, in analytics and whatever, right? But now, because of the crypto and the drive, you have more and more young people coming and starting to develop in blockchain. And all of a sudden, as everything is maturing, now those skill sets are becoming more generally available on the market, and the appreciation and understanding of technology is increasing on the market. So all of a sudden, now you have this like stable of people who are available, who understand what they're doing, that are trying to apply their knowledge and expertise to solving different types of business problems. And this is exactly when you start seeing kind of a supply chain solution that is based on the blockchain, a merchandising and pricing solution that is based on blockchain, and so forth. And this is what drives kind of increasingly drives the mass adoption and brings it to this point when the critical mass is achieved and it becomes kind of an easy decision to be made. In the same way as with the email and internet, right? First, it was just an interesting thing. Then people said, yep, I could definitely understand how email is better than me typing letters on typewriters and sending inter-office memos to everybody, right? If you still remember those days, unfortunately I do, right? I remember receiving like typed office memos. So, but then all of a sudden you have a bunch of people understanding, wow, I know how this technology works. I can spin up my own website. Then I can make this website robust, so I can actually have more than 100 people hitting it at the same time and it doesn't come down. So all of those things get fast, and then it becomes this technology that's generally available, and there is a lot of people who understand how to work with it.
That's awesome. Thanks for spelling that out. That makes a lot of sense. I've got a question here that's directed primarily at Sergey from Mike, who says that is the thinking that the Walmart case will eventually require it to be decentralized. If that is not a requirement, Mike says, I don't understand why an engineering org would opt to use a distributed system that is much more complicated than a traditional centralized distributed database.
It's a very good question. So Mike, think about it this way, right? There is kind of the establishment of a solution, everything else, then there is kind of the celebrity tenant and everything else. Right now, Walmart and carriers are realizing quite a bit of value, but they'll start realizing even more value once the network grows. So imagine if you're a carrier, and now instead of just Walmart, you have a number of other BCOs available on network. And instead of building those one-to-one connections through EDI or any other method, which are expensive as well and quite clunky, right? It's a frictionless, easy way of onboarding, and now you can interact with more. On the other hand, imagine if you're a supplier. So right now you have access to all those carriers and the Walmart, but again, as the network grows, you have access to more carriers, more BCOs and everything else. And now the network effect actually eventually starts eclipsing the value of the solution by itself. And this is where the distributed nature of blockchain starts to really shine, right? So that's why we have to allow this beautiful flower to grow, and it goes through its stages. So right now, at this stage, we can still go one way or the other. But as it continues and turns more into the network, then you see the real value of blockchain truly becoming completely undoubted.
Thanks, Sergey. Another question is, what is the learning curve to implement blockchain? Do we have to scrap older technology and software?
I don't think so. I think it comes down to specialization, right? So for example, this is what impressed me with DLT Labs. That's why I joined the company, is that instead of getting into the religious wars on which blockchain is better than the other, or trying to come up with a blockchain ourselves, they said, you know what, we understand the blockchains. We've been there right from the beginning. Let's work on the next level up. Let's work out on the configurable platform that could allow an enterprise to gain the benefits of a blockchain without necessarily developing the skill sets and everything else to do the blockchain themselves, right? So they moved one step further on this continuum of kind of using this technology as a service and things like that. And that allows for quick configuration versus long customizations or custom development, right? Robustness of the overall platform, because they're not kind of reinventing the wheel each time, right? But they're managing like access rights, security, privacy, everything else. It's already available out of the box at an enterprise level, and that makes it easier to adopt and reduces friction. And also does not require kind of those highly specialized and highly expensive skill sets to be spun up at different enterprises. And if Walmart can probably afford those kind of skill sets and will probably be able to retain them, if you talk about mid to small size enterprises, there is no way, right? For them, it's like, and most important, there is no need for them to create those kind of IT organizations that would be doing it themselves.
And I think that brings up an interesting point, Sergey, and you're seeing this in the explosion in no or low code technologies that live on top of a blockchain layer. There's a really exciting company out there called Stezi. It's like stezi.io. And you can literally sign up and create your own blockchain network in under an hour. It's really impressive. And it does all of the technical work behind the scenes. And so when you talk about, selling a C-suite against the impression that this is going to be terribly technical and expensive, some of that argument is starting to get defeated with some really exciting products in the marketplace.
Yeah, and this is also a good point, because what is also emerging is kind of interoperability between multiple blockchains. And we're actually now dealing with one of the tier 1 companies in looking how to connect their blockchain setting to the network that we're establishing, so that there is a much better holistic value proposition to the participants in both networks. And we'll see more and more interoperability between multiple core blockchains happening, or solutions at the next level interoperating. And that's very exciting.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are getting to the end of this session. So if Sergey or Patrick, if either of you have something you want to close us out with here, now would be a great time to do that. Otherwise, Brian will take over and wrap this up. But I do want to give you both an opportunity to give your closing comments, or to, finish up a conversation that we've left hanging.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Sergey. I always enjoy getting your latest insights on what y'all are up to, and it's important to hear from individuals like yourselves that are actually doing the work. As I made the joke, it's like my grandmother understands, kind of what I do. She's like, oh, he works in blockchain, because of the awareness that organizations like IBM have driven into this space. But there's a real difference in what y'all are doing in terms of real world projects and some of the marketing hype out there in people's minds. So it's important to talk about these real world projects. And I just want to say, thank you, Lewis, thank you, Brian, thank you, Lisa, for providing this platform for us to tell that side of the story. I think a lot of people in this audience probably have read the piece this week that was talking about enterprise blockchain being dead. And I think hopefully that we've dispelled some of the narrative that might be a little bit too clickbaity. And so I guess my final point that I'll leave y'all with is blockchain is a network effect driven technology. It's most successful when you can build a network of stakeholders to leverage it. And just like our community, we can't do it alone. And so I'd encourage y'all to learn more and get involved and check out our website. It's beta.studio. We're always looking for talented and excited professionals to help us define those next generation data elements that we think are going to enable a blockchain powered world. So I'll throw it over to Sergey.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Again, I just wanted to thank you for this format. I very much appreciate the short presentation, longer Q&A. Wish there was even longer Q&A, because good conversations are happening, and I saw some really good questions coming up in chat. So hopefully we'll be able to answer them at some point. And I also wanted to thank you all the participants, right? So this is great that you're interested. The fact that we have such a turn up at this specific webinar is probably a good proof that the probably blockchain in the enterprise is not dead. People are still interested, right? And the interesting part is that blockchain, unfortunately, isn't sexy and will not be one, right? It'll probably take its space within the stable of available technologies to solve business problems, right? And it will only grow because it's a good technology, it's a fundamental one, and we're still in the early days.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. So this brings us to right about just 10 to 1, which it lasted a lot longer than I thought it would, given that we're missing Ligi. But I learned a lot. For example, the distinction between a POC and a pilot is one that I hadn't thought about. But when I'm thinking about early stage supply chain startups, that's one of the things that you typically run into as an issue, because companies aren't going to just adopt your supply chain technology because you said it works. If it doesn't work, it's a huge problem. But then thinking about how do you think about the engagement between a big company and a startup such that you can actually demonstrate that this works in a way that, if the answer is yes, it works, then Sergey, like you described, it doesn't mean you start from scratch all over again, but you can now implement it in the business. So that was, and there are many more things. I'm going to spend the weekend and all of next week studying up. But thank you very much, Sergey. Thank you, Patrick. Hopefully this was as informative for everyone else as it was for me. Someone asked in the comment if any of us is on Clubhouse. Yes, we're on Clubhouse. In fact, I think our community on Clubhouse is now at 1,700 members, which is quite mind-boggling because just a week ago we were at 900 and change. And on Monday, we're having a follow-up to this event where we're going to. That's likely to be a much more rowdy conversation as things on Clubhouse go. But it's same topic. What's happening with blockchain and supply chain, and we'll see what comes out of the conversation there. Lisa, did you want to say anything? You've been quiet. If you're still on the
Hi,
call.
I'm here. Yeah, I've just been working on a bunch of stuff simultaneously. I'm so excited to hear so much going on in blockchain. I know that I myself have been working on some blockchain enabled SEC compliant commodities trading platform stuff. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of the need for blockchain and this immutable ledger across trade finance. Lots of amazing things that it unlocks, not just speed, but instant credentialing and, of course, massive efficiencies for being able to cut out all these middlemen. Looking forward to diving into that later in the year as we get some proof points with a partner on a project I'm working on. And if anyone has any interest in learning more or has other blockchain finance trade platforms, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. What else, Brian? Brian, my co-founder, just had a massive Clubhouse party line event last night. I found myself tweeting about cannabis and sex tech supply chains. And
Wait! You left out one detail. Drinking something and wanking. I was like, oh my God.
yeah.
Well, what's my co-founder tweet?
The quote that I tweeted out was from, it wasn't Cindy Gallup, it was one of the other speakers, that the number one thing that everyone is doing thanks to COVID is staying home, drinking and wanking. You can only get that.
You can only get that on Clubhouse. Right.
Extremely, open community and have some open conversations. Obviously, Clubhouse gets a little more rowdy, especially late at night. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, follow Brian or I on Clubhouse. If you need an invite, feel free to reach out. And if you don't know what Clubhouse is, it's basically the cool kids party line for invite only audio chat groups. It's heavily seeded with Silicon Valley literati and who's who, all the fancy people. Elon Musk is on there and has open chats, etc. So if you're interested, reach out. What else do we have going on, Brian?
I think that's it. I think that's it right now.
Oh, can we talk about the, rolling fund? Yet?
in very vague terms. I think in very vague terms. We're working on getting a rolling fund off the ground to invest exclusively in supply chain technology across industries. There's some information on our website, refashioned.com, and when we have more information, we'll definitely be sharing it with all of you. But I think on that note, I owe a gratitude of thanks to Charlie, who prodded me about the topic, to Priyanka, who helped us get this together, to Melanie, who reached out to me, I think about a year ago. And I was like, well, I don't really know. Let's see what happens. But here we are. And also to Alicia, who volunteered to help us manage the waiting room. This doesn't work without help from our members. So thank you very much.
Oh, I have one thing I should add.
Yeah.
If you want to keep the conversation going and you haven't already gotten an invite to our Worldwide Supply Chain Federation Slack group, reach out, send us your email. We'd be happy to add you. It's an open group where we encourage the community to collaborate, share insights, white papers, projects working on, etc. It's a great space for continuing the conversation.
To make it easy, I'll send an email through Meetup after this. So if you haven't, well, if you're here, you've subscribed to to organizers' emails, but I'll do that after this. Okay. On that note, thank you, everyone. This was a fantastic event, and to the speakers and organizers, I'll follow up by email soon after this. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.